She's alive. A homeless black boy's revelation leaves the billionaire speechless. The rain beat hard against the windows of St. John's Cemetery, creating a melancholy melody that echoed among the century-old cypress trees. Edward Thompson remained motionless before the white coffin, his trembling hands holding a small golden lantern. Haley, his only daughter, lay there, serene as she had never been in life. The rare disease that consumed her in just 3 months had stolen from him the most precious person in the world. "Daddy always said I was his firefly," he whispered to himself, recalling the affectionate words they had exchanged since Haley was little. A small light that never goes out even in the deepest darkness. That golden lantern was the symbol of the love between father and daughter, an intimate secret they had shared for years. People began to approach the coffin for a final goodbye. Rebecca, his wife, cried discreetly beside Marcus, Edward's brother and Haley's godfather. The employees of Thompson Developments, the business empire built by Edward over 30 years, paid their respects with reverential respect. Everyone knew that Haley would have been the natural heir to the family business. "Stay strong, Edward," Marcus murmured, placing his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Haley is in a better place now." Edward nodded mechanically, but something inside him refused to accept that loss. Haley was only 22 years old, in the prime of her life, studying business administration to take over the family business. How could a disease have been so cruel and fast? The priest began the final prayers when a strange noise interrupted the ceremony. Hurried footsteps echoed down the marble corridor of the cemetery. Everyone turned, curious to see who would dare disturb such a solemn moment. A black boy, approximately 12 years old, appeared at the entrance to the chapel. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hair disheveled by the rain. He was breathing heavily, as if he had run a long distance. His wide eyes scanned the luxurious environment with a mixture of fear and determination. "Wait!" shouted the boy, pointing to the coffin. "That girl isn't his daughter!" A murmur of indignation swept through those present. Some guests stood up, scandalized by the interruption. Edward felt his blood freeze in his veins. Who was this child? How dare he desecrate his daughter's funeral? "Get this kid out of here," ordered Marcus, signaling to the security guards. What an outrage! But the boy didn't back down. He fixed his eyes directly on Edward, completely ignoring the threats around him. "You're her father, right? Then tell me something. Where's the firefly?" Edward felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Firefly? How did that street boy know that word? It was impossible, absolutely impossible. Only he and Haley knew that intimate secret. "What did you say?" whispered Edward, slowly approaching the boy. "The firefly, sir. The girl I saw far away. She kept talking about the firefly. Said it was a light that never goes out, that her father gave it to her when she was little." The boy wiped his nose on the sleeve of his worn shirt. "But that one in the coffin, she doesn't have the firefly. How can it be the same person?" The silence that followed was deafening. Edward looked at the coffin, then at the boy, trying to process what he had just heard. It was impossible. Haley was dead. He himself had identified the body at the hospital. The medical tests confirmed it. All the documents were in order. "What girl did you see?" asked Edward, his voice barely audible. "In Riverdale Heights." "She was in a small house, kind of hidden. A woman was taking care of her, but she seemed very sad. She kept talking all the time about the firefly and a rich man she called father." The boy hesitated for a moment. "She looks just like that one. In the coffin, except her eyes, and they were different. Sadder, you know." Rebecca approached, her face pale. "Edward, don't listen to this child. He must be confused, traumatized by something." But Edward couldn't take his eyes off the boy. There was something in the sincerity of that childish gaze that deeply disturbed him. And the mention of the firefly. How was that possible? "How do you know about the firefly?" Edward insisted. "Because she showed me," exclaimed the boy, sticking his hand into the pocket of his torn pants. "Look here." To everyone's amazement, the boy pulled out a small golden lantern, identical to the one Edward was holding. The billionaire almost fainted. It was impossible. Completely impossible. "Where did you get this?" stuttered Edward. "She gave it to. Said if I ever found a very rich man looking for her, I should show this. that he would understand. The boy looked around, observing the well-dressed people, the luxury of the ceremony. "I think you're that man, right?" Edward took the lantern from the boy's hands with trembling fingers. It was identical to his, down to the minutest details. The engraving on the base was perfect. "For my firefly with eternal love, Dad." But how could two identical lanterns exist? He himself had only one made years ago as a special gift for Haley. "Edward, this is absurd," interrupted Marcus, approaching. "This boy is making up stories. He probably stole that lantern from somewhere." But Edward wasn't listening anymore. His mind was working frantically, trying to understand what was happening. If there really was another girl with an identical lantern, if she knew the Firefly secret, if she physically resembled Haley. "What's your name?" Edward asked the boy. "Ryan, sir. I've been living on the streets for about 2 years since my mum. Since I've been alone." "And this girl, what was she like?" Ryan closed his eyes, concentrating. "Light brown hair, fair skin, thin, but she was very sick. Coughed a lot. The woman who took care of her gave her medicine all the time. She told me her name was Haley." Edward felt the world spin around him. Haley. The girl's name was also Haley. All of this was a nightmare. It had to be. "Where exactly did you see her?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "On Palm Street, house number 47, a simple little blue house. I used to pass by there sometimes asking for food, and she was always at the window looking at the street with a sad face." Edward looked at the coffin one more time. His daughter's serene face seemed familiar, but something was beginning to bother him. A shadow of doubt that grew with each second. What if? No, it was impossible to think about it. "Dad, let's go," whispered a soft voice. Edward turned, expecting to see Haley, but it was just the echo of his tortured memory. The priest waited, embarrassed, to continue the ceremony. The guests were becoming impatient. "Ryan," said Edward, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, "are you absolutely sure of what you're saying?" "Yes, sir. The girl asked me to look for her father if anything happened, said he had a lot of money and that he would understand about the Firefly." Ryan looked directly into Edward's eyes. "Will you help me find her?" The question echoed through the chapel like a silent thunder. Edward knew his life was about to completely change. If there was a possibility, even a remote one, that his daughter was alive somewhere, he would move heaven and earth to find her. "Yes," Edward replied, surprising everyone present. "I'll help you." And at that moment, in front of the coffin that perhaps did not contain his real daughter, Edward Thompson made the decision that would change everything. He would investigate that impossible story to the end. Because sometimes when we lose everything, we discover that hope can be born from the most unexpected places. The Thompson mansion remained in sepulchral silence after the funeral. Edward locked himself in his office for hours, holding the 2 golden lanterns on his mahogany desk. One belonged to the Haley in the coffin. The other had come from Ryan's hands, identical in every detail, impossible to exist in duplicate. Ryan slept on the library sofa, exhausted after the traumatic day. Edward had insisted that the boy stay at the mansion, at least until they clarified the situation. Rebecca had not approved of the decision, but had not dared to contradict her husband at such a delicate moment. "Edward, you need to rest," said Rebecca, entering the office with a cup of tea. "This boy is confusing your mind. You know that Haley is—" She couldn't complete the sentence. "No," Edward replied firmly. "Something is very wrong, Rebecca. How does this boy know about the Firefly? How does he have an identical lantern? I myself had only one made, 15 years ago, when Haley was 7. Rebecca approached the desk, observing the lanterns. "Maybe someone made a copy. You know how cruel people can be, making up stories to take advantage of our suffering." But Edward shook his head. "It's not just that. At the hospital, when I identified the body—" He stopped, running his hands through his graying hair. "I was so devastated I could barely look. What if I made a mistake? What if the person in the coffin wasn't really our Haley?" "Edward, please. You're talking nonsense." The doctors confirmed it. "All the documents are correct. Documents can be forged, Rebecca, and doctors can make mistakes." Edward stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. "Early tomorrow morning I'm going to Riverdale Heights with Ryan. I need to see this girl he mentioned." Rebecca turned pale. "You can't be serious. That place is dangerous. And even if there is some girl who looks like Haley, that doesn't mean—" "It means our daughter might be alive," Edward exploded, turning to his wife. "And if she's suffering somewhere, while we bury someone else? How can you stand there so calm knowing about this possibility?" Tears ran down Rebecca's face. "Because I can't stand the idea of having hope and then losing it again. Edward, Haley is gone. I saw her waste away. In that hospital for weeks. I was by her side when—" "When what?" interrupted Edward. "Were you there when she died?" "I wasn't. I arrived at the hospital and was told it was too late." A strange silence settled between the couple. Edward noticed something different in Rebecca's expression, a shadow he had never noticed before. "Rebecca, tell me exactly what happened at the hospital that day." I was with her. Haley was very weak, could barely speak. The doctors said it was a matter of hours." Rebecca avoided her husband's gaze. "When you arrived, it was already too late." Edward studied his wife's face. There was something there he couldn't decipher, a hesitation he had never noticed before, or perhaps his desperation was making him see things where they didn't exist. The next morning, Edward woke Ryan up early. The boy had spent the most peaceful night of his life, sleeping in a soft bed for the first time in years. But when he saw Edward getting ready to leave, he immediately jumped off the sofa. "Are we going after the girl?" asked Ryan, his eyes shining with hope. "We are. But promise me one thing. If all this is a misunderstanding, if the girl you saw isn't my daughter, you won't be punished, understand? I need to know the truth, even if it hurts." Ryan nodded solemnly. At 12 years old, he had already learned that truth was a luxury too expensive for those who lived on the streets. The journey to Riverdale Heights was silent. Edward drove his black Mercedes through increasingly precarious streets while Ryan indicated the way. The difference between the two worlds was striking. On one side, the opulence of West Side. On the other, the raw reality of Boston's poorer neighborhoods. "It's there," said Ryan, pointing to a faded blue house. "Number 47. Edward parked the car, aware of the curious glances from the residents. A rich man with an imported Mercedes didn't go unnoticed in that place. Ryan got out first, waving to some people who recognized him. "Hey Ryan, where have you been, boy?" shouted a lady from the window next door. "Taking care of some things, Mrs. Miller. This gentleman here is the father of that Haley I told you about." Edward felt his heart race. Other people knew the story. Was there really a girl named Haley in that house? They knocked on the door of the blue house. Hurried footsteps echoed from inside, followed by a tense silence. Finally, a middle-aged woman opened the door, just a crack. "What do you want?" she asked suspiciously. "I'm Edward Thompson. This boy told me there's a young woman named Haley living here. I need to speak with her." The woman's expression changed drastically. Pure panic took over her eyes. She tried to close the door quickly, but Edward was faster. "Please, I just want to talk. If she's my daughter, there's no one here by that name," said the woman, clearly nervous. "You've got the wrong place." But at that exact moment, a weak voice echoed from inside the house. "Who's there, Angela?" Edward felt the world stop. That voice, it was impossible, but it sounded exactly like Haley. "Here's Haley." "Nobody, dear." "Go back to your room," Angela shouted. "But I heard voices. Are there visitors?" Edward pushed the door with gentleness but firmness, entering the simple house. What he saw made him stagger. At the end of the narrow corridor, leaning against the wall, was a young woman identical to Haley. Thin, pale, clearly ill but alive. Their eyes met, and Edward saw in them the same intelligent sparkle he knew so well. "Daddy," whispered the young woman and fainted. Edward ran to support her, his heart exploding with emotion. It was her. It was really Haley. But how? How was she there, sick and hidden, while he buried someone else? "What's going on here?" Edward demanded of Angela, who was crying desperately. "I didn't want to. They forced me. They said she would be fine, that it was just temporary." Who? Who forced you?" Angela shook her head, terrified. "I can't say. They'll hurt me if I tell." Edward picked up Haley in his arms, feeling how far too light she was. His daughter was alive, but clearly very ill. She needed urgent medical care. "Ryan, help me take her to the car, and you," he said to Angela, "are coming with me to explain all this." On the way to the hospital, Haley woke up slowly, her eyes fixed on Edward, confused. "Dad, is it really you? I dreamed about this moment so much." "Yes, my daughter, it's me. You're safe now." Haley tried to sit up, but she was too weak. "I knew you would come for me. The firefly never goes out, right?" "Dad?" Edward held his daughter's hand, tears rolling down his face. "Never, Haley, never goes out." But as he rushed to the hospital, a question hammered in his mind. If Haley was there, alive in his arms, who was the person he had buried? And why had someone orchestrated that macabre farce? The truth was just beginning to be revealed, and Edward sensed that the following discoveries would be even more shocking than he imagined. St. Mary's Hospital was bustling with activity when Edward arrived carrying Haley. The medical team, already accustomed to attending to the Thompson family, was perplexed to see the young woman who had supposedly died the previous week. Dr. Carter, the family's personal physician for years, almost fainted when he saw her. "Edward, this is impossible. I myself signed Haley's death certificate." "Then who did you examine?" Edward shot back as the nurses placed Haley on a stretcher. "Because my daughter is here alive and you told me she was dead." Haley was taken to a private suite, where a battery of tests began immediately. Edward remained beside the bed holding her hand, still unable to completely believe in the miracle. Ryan stayed in a corner of the room, observing everything with wide eyes. "Dad," whispered Haley, "I knew you would come, even when everyone said you thought that I wasn't here anymore." "What do you mean, Haley? Who said that?" "The nurse, Angela. She took care of me, but always seemed afraid. She said you thought I was gone, and that it was better that way." Haley closed her eyes, exhausted. "I didn't understand anything. Why didn't you come to see me? Why did Mom never show up?" Edward felt a dull anger grow in his chest. Someone had manipulated his daughter, made her believe she had been abandoned. But who and why? Dr. Carter returned with a worried expression. "Edward, we need to talk in private." In the corridor, the doctor seemed downcast. "Haley is very ill. She has the same rare condition that we diagnosed in the person we treated before. But there's something strange in the previous tests." "What do you mean?" "I had my team review all the records. The DNA tests we did to confirm the identity were altered. Someone sabotaged the results." Edward felt the ground open beneath his feet. Sabotaged? How? "The samples were switched. Whoever did this knew our protocols perfectly, had access to the laboratories, knew exactly when and how to act." Dr. Carter lowered his voice. "Edward, this was a very well-planned operation. Someone wanted you to believe that Haley had died. But who would have an interest in this? And who was the person I buried?" The doctor shook his head. "I can't answer that, but I will investigate everything in the smallest detail. Someone played with a family in mourning, and that's unforgivable." Edward returned to Haley's room, his mind working frantically. Who would have access to the exams? Who knew the hospital routine well? And most importantly, why would someone do such a thing? "Mr. Edward," said Ryan timidly, "can I ask something?" "Of course, Ryan." "When I saw Haley at Ms. Angela's house, she always talked about a person who visited her sometimes. An elegant, well-dressed woman. She called her aunt." Edward frowned. "What do you mean, aunt?" "Yeah, she said the aunt came to see how she was doing, brought expensive medicines, but never let her leave the house, said it was dangerous." A terrible suspicion began to form in Edward's mind. "Ryan, this woman, what was she like?" "Beautiful, blonde hair, always wearing expensive clothes, drove a silver car. Haley seemed to like her but was also afraid of her." Edward quickly left the room, picking up the phone. He called Rebecca, but she didn't answer. He tried several times without success. A growing anguish took hold of him. He decided to go home for answers. He left Haley under specialized medical care, with Ryan keeping her company. "Take care of her for me," he said to the boy. "You were a hero bringing me to her." At the mansion, he found Rebecca in the living room, standing in front of the window that overlooked the garden. She didn't turn when Edward entered. "She's alive," said Edward. Rebecca remained motionless. "I know." "How do you know?" "I just called and you didn't answer." Finally, Rebecca turned. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something different in her expression, a mixture of relief and terror. "Because I always knew, Edward." The world stopped for Edward. "What are you saying?" "Haley never died. The girl you buried was my niece, my sister Carla's daughter." Edward felt his legs weaken. He had to support himself on the armchair. "Your niece? But why? Why did you do this?" Rebecca collapsed on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. "It wasn't my idea. It was Marcus's. He said it was the only way." "Marcus? My brother?" He discovered that Haley was going to inherit the entire company when she turned 25. He was furious, said he had as much right as she did to the family fortune. He started devising a plan. Rebecca sobbed between words. "My niece, Caroline, was very ill, given up by the doctors. Marcus said we could help two families at the same time." Edward couldn't process what he was hearing. "Help? You kidnapped my daughter." "It wasn't kidnapping. Haley was really sick, needed special care. Marcus said that while she recovered away from the spotlight, Caroline could have the best medical treatments. When she passed, it would be easy to make you believe it was Haley." "And afterward? What was the plan afterward?" Rebecca avoided her husband's gaze. "Marcus would take over the company as your only heir. Said he would take care of Haley forever, that she would have a good life away from all this." Edward exploded. "A good life? She was wasting away in a miserable little house thinking I had abandoned her. You destroyed my daughter's mind." "I didn't want to. I tried to convince Marcus to give up, but he said it was too late. That if we told the truth, we would all go to prison." Edward paced the room like a caged lion. Everything made sense now. Marcus had always shown jealousy of his younger brother's prosperity. Edward had built the business empire practically alone, while Marcus had squandered his inheritance on bad investments. Where is Marcus now? He traveled to Montana right after the funeral, said he needed time to process the loss. Edward picked up the phone, dialing a private investigator he occasionally hired for business matters. "Anthony, I need you to find my brother Marcus. Immediately. And I want everything on him. Bank accounts, properties, contacts, everything." Then he hung up and faced Rebecca. "You're going to accompany me to the police station. We're going to tell everything to the police. Edward, please think of Haley. If this becomes a scandal, she'll suffer even more. The newspapers, the exposure. Haley has suffered enough because of your lies. Now she needs the truth, even if it's painful." Rebecca stood up, trembling. "And us, what will happen to us?" Edward looked at the woman with whom he had lived 25 years of marriage. "I don't know, Rebecca. I don't know if I can forgive this. You played with my daughter's life as if it were a game. I love her as if she were my own daughter. I never wanted her to suffer. But you let her suffer. You let her believe she was abandoned by the father who loved her most in the world." Edward left the room, determined to seek justice. Marcus would have to answer for what he did, and he himself would have to find a way to rebuild Haley's trust, to heal the deep wounds that betrayal had caused. Because now Edward knew that the worst enemy sometimes lives inside one's own home, dressed in love and loyalty, plotting in the shadows while smiling to your face. 3 months passed since the day Edward discovered the most painful truth of his life. Haley was recovering slowly in the hospital with the best medical treatment money could buy. Ryan had been officially adopted by the family and was attending a private school, fulfilling the dream of studying that he had nurtured on the streets. Marcus had been located in rural Montana on a farm he had bought with money diverted from the family business. The police arrested him without resistance, and he confessed the entire scheme in detail. Nurse Angela was also arrested, but received a lesser sentence for having cooperated with the investigations and taken good care of Haley during the captivity. Edward visited Haley every day in the hospital, but the relationship between father and daughter was still fragile. Haley struggled to understand why she had been separated from her family, why her own stepmother had participated in the conspiracy. The young woman alternated between moments of affection and episodes of distrust, as if she feared that everything was just a cruel dream. "Dad," said Haley on a sunny afternoon, as Edward arranged fresh flowers in the vase beside her bed, "can you tell me about Mom? My real Mom?" Edward sat in the chair beside the bed, taking his daughter's hands. "Your mother was the bravest woman I've ever known. She left us when you were very small, but she left something very precious." "What?" "You." Edward smiled, caressing Haley's brown hair. "She always said you were our special light, our little firefly. That's why I gave you that golden lantern." Haley touched the lantern she always kept beside her bed. "I never forgot about it, even when I thought you didn't love me anymore. Haley, I could never stop loving you. You're the most important thing in my life, and I promise we'll never be separated again." At that moment, Ryan entered the room, carrying a folder with drawings from school. "Hi, Haley. Look what I made in art class." Haley smiled for the first time in days. "Show me, Ryan." Edward observed the interaction between the two young people, feeling a warmth in his chest. Ryan had become like a son to him and a comforting presence for Haley. The street boy had a pure heart that helped heal the family's wounds. "Father Edward," said Ryan, "the school principal asked if you could go there tomorrow. They want to give you an award for the project you created." Edward had established a foundation for underprivileged children, funding education and medical care for young people in vulnerable situations. It was his way of transforming pain into something positive, of honoring the brave boy who had saved his daughter. "Of course I'll go, Ryan. This award is actually yours. You're the one who inspired me." Dr. Carter entered the room with a broad smile. "Haley, I have wonderful news. Your latest tests showed significant improvement. If this continues, you can be discharged next week." Haley jumped on the bed with joy, but soon her smile faded. "Discharged to where? To that house where Rebecca still lives?" Edward had separated from Rebecca shortly after discovering the truth. Although she had shown genuine remorse, trust was completely broken. "No, Haley. We're going to a new place, a house just for us where you'll feel safe and loved. And Ryan comes with us?" "If he wants to," smiled Edward. "Of course I want to," exclaimed Ryan. "We're a family now, right?" Edward felt his eyes fill with tears. A family. That was exactly what they had become. A family born of adversity, strengthened by love and truth. A week later, Haley was discharged from the hospital. Edward had bought a beautiful house in Lakeside Hills with a view of the sea and a large garden where Haley could recover completely. Ryan had his own room, decorated with the drawings he made at school. On the first night in the new house, the three sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the ocean. Haley was wrapped in a light shawl, still fragile but visibly stronger. "Dad," said Haley softly, "I want to ask your forgiveness." "Forgiveness? For what?" "For having doubted your love, for having believed that you had abandoned me. I should have known my father better." Edward held his daughter in his arms, feeling her tremble slightly. "Haley, you have nothing to apologize for. You were the victim of a cruel lie. The important thing is that we're together now. Forever. Forever. And do you know why?" Edward took the two golden lanterns, which now stayed on the living room coffee table. "Because the firefly never goes out. Even in the deepest darkness, there's always a light to guide us back home." Ryan approached the two, completing the embrace. "Can I be part of your light too?" "You already are, Ryan," said Haley, kissing the boy's forehead. "You were the one who brought Dad to me. You were our guardian angel." Months later, Haley was completely recovered and had resumed her business administration studies. She now worked alongside her father in the company, learning the family business with a maturity that the painful experience had given her. Ryan excelled in school and dreamed of becoming a doctor to help other children like him. Marcus was serving a prison sentence for kidnapping and fraud, having lost all his assets. Rebecca had moved to the countryside, where she lived discreetly, carrying the weight of guilt for her actions. She occasionally wrote letters to Haley, asking for forgiveness, but respected the distance that the young woman needed to maintain. Edward had learned that the greatest wealth wasn't in the company's coffers, but at the dinner table where the three gathered every night, sharing stories of the day. He had learned that true love isn't measured in money or possessions, but in the courage to fight for those we love, even when everything seems lost. One night, as he watched Haley and Ryan playing in the garden, Edward held his golden lantern and whispered, "Thank you for showing me that miracles exist, and that sometimes they come disguised as street boys with hearts of gold." The golden light shone softly in the palm of his hand, and Edward knew that finally his family was complete. The firefly had found its way back home, and this time nothing and no one would be able to extinguish its light. Haley ran to him, radiant with joy. "Dad, did you see? Ryan got all the math problems right. He's a genius." Edward hugged the two young people, feeling his heart overflow with happiness. "You two are my most precious treasures, and do you know what that means?" "What?" they asked in unison. "That our light will never go out again. Because when love is true, it conquers any darkness." And there, under Boston's starry sky, a family, forged by adversity, celebrated the greatest treasure one can conquer, the reunion with those we love. The end, dear listeners. We hope that the story of Edward, Haley, and Ryan has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative shows us that true love is capable of overcoming the most painful betrayals, and that sometimes our greatest heroes appear in the most unexpected moments, disguised as brave children who dare to speak the truth. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, where every day we bring narratives that explore the deepest feelings of the human soul. Leave your like to help us reach more hearts thirsty for genuine stories, and tell us in the comments which moment most marked you in this journey of reunion and redemption. Don't miss our next stories, as each one carries a life lesson that can transform our way of seeing the world. Until soon, and remember, just like Edward and Haley's firefly,